Hi, everyone. I am Kathy from Sag Moraine Native Plant Community. For those of you who are new to our channel, we are an all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit organization in Northeast Illinois in the Chicago region, and we are going to be presenting tonight 7 native spring ephemerals for early pollinators. I want to add that I am joined tonight by Lexi. It's wonderful to see you again, Lexi.
Hi, Kathy. Can't wait to talk about something so beautiful, and spring is finally upon us.
What a perfect time to be talking about these guys. They're just, some are up and some are about to come up. They're so cheerful because it's the most cheerful time of year because all the wonderful garden season is all ahead of us. So here we go, 7 native spring ephem. This is not an exhaustive list either. There are others, but we had to narrow it down because we figured you didn't want to be here for 3 hours. So we're narrowing it down to some of the most popular and easiest to grow. So we are going to start by discussing what is a spring ephemeral. You know, for years before I understood about natives, I would plant bulbs. I would plant daffodils. I still have beautiful daffodils along the back fence of my yard. You know, they're just tried and true and they come up every year. I did plant uh, a lot of tulips and years past. Kind of lost my patience with those because they were always dug up by, I don't know if it was rabbits or squirrels, but I would plant them one year, maybe half would come up that next year, and by the following year I wouldn't really get any. But yet I've seen them in other places, like even neighbors down the street where they seem to do fine. But by me, I guess I just have too many critters eating or something. But then when I realized that in the native plant world, we have our own bulbs. We don't need to just rely on, tulips from Holland. What about the beautiful quote unquote bulbs, early spring plants that we have that are native here and that are servicing our local ecosystem so wonderfully, which is what we're going to be talking about. One of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. So what is a spring ephemeral? Like this bloodroot that we are looking at in the photo, this lovely bloodroot that looks like it has beautiful foliage. It almost puts me in mind of like a wild geranium or something. Bloodroot or spring ephemerals are woodland plants of the forest floor that bloom early before the canopy trees leaf out. Similar to tulips and daffodils, the foliage turns yellow and withers away by midsummer. They go dormant until the following spring. So under your trees, where you have leaf litter, perfect, because I know we're leaving our leaf litter there, perfect environment for these woodland ephemeral, early spring ephemerals to grow. And the cool thing about them is, you can let them like really be a carpet. You can let them smother the ground, and your other plants that are going to come up later will be fine because once these are done blooming in early spring, they die back. And as we'll be talking tonight, there's ways in which they're actually going to help the next plants that are going to come up um, thrive. So just really cool, important plants and fun to add to our landscapes for both beauty and health.
All right, so where do you find spring ephemerals? This is a beautiful picture of red trillium, just a gorgeous, gorgeous ephemeral that you'll see in the woodlands. And as we look at these plants this evening, you're going to see that they dominate the eastern and central U.S., and that's because of the unique combination of deciduous forest canopy, spring sunlight, moist soil, and glacial history. The West Coast has its own early blooming native wildflowers, some of which behave like ephemerals, especially in woodland or the mountain settings, but they're adapted to different environmental patterns. So when we talk about the deciduous forest, the spring ephemerals evolved in these conditions where the trees drop their leaves in the fall and then they take some time to leaf out in the spring. This creates this brief window of full sun in early spring, perfect for these shade adapted plants to grow and bloom and disappear before the canopy closes. The eastern and the central US woodlands also tend to have very consistent spring moisture. We get lots of rain, very fertile soils, and relatively stable temperatures. So these are ideal for these short-lived plants. And these ephemerals take advantage of these beautiful spring rains and cool temperatures. They do not like heat and drought. So they're going to die off before that actually happens. And just where the glacial patterns happened, these regions are actually biodiversity hotspots for our forest flora plants. So as we look at the maps for all these plants this evening, you're going to see that they are centered in these areas, and this is why.
I'm looking at the foliage of this red trillium. Isn't that cool? I mean, most plants that have, what do they call it when you have two-tone foliage?
Variegated.
Variegated. Thank you very much. Most of that is done through hybridization or cultivation. But look at this is like a natural, it almost reminds me of like a variegated foliage.
It's absolutely stunning. I had some of these pop up in my little woodland garden just on their own, and it was just such a special sight to see them.
Love them. Okay.
Okay, so why are native spring ephemerals so important? They are so important because of their timing and that they are a critical source of pollen and nectar for our early emerging bees and other beneficial insects. So these plants co-evolved with these insects, and our bees are vegetarians. They're looking for nectar and they're looking for pollen. Bees actually evolved from wasps, and wasps do eat other insects, but our bees go for the pollen and the nectar, and they need the pollen specifically to raise their young. And Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about that. So here we've got beautiful Virginia bluebells, just absolutely stunning. And we've got a beautiful little bumblebee putting its head into there, using its long tongue to get the deep nectar inside of the flower. And nearly all of our native bee species in North America overwinter in some form, even on the West Coast and in the warmer parts of our country. So they'll overwinter in the soil, in the hollow stems of plants. That's why we always say don't cut back your plants, leave them, let those bees overwinter in those stems, or in the leaf litter. And that's why leaving the leaves is so important, because that is where they are overwintering. So the bees will emerge in early to mid-spring once the temperatures are consistently above freezing. And this is where the beauty of nature and timing just takes over. The flowers are ready when the bees come out of the ground, and they've got their nectar source and the bees are going there so they can start their colony. So the spring ephemerals time their bloom with the emergence of these bees, and we need to make sure that these plants remain in our landscape to support these bees and their life cycles. If they don't have these plants, then they can't form their colony for the next season. So Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about this and our key emerging early pollinators.
I'm sure that's a big plump queen that had just emerged and was like, yay, there's bluebells here.
She knew what was waiting for her.
Okay, so who are some of these key early emerging pollinators that are so dependent on a lot of these spring ephemerals and some other like, early blooming trees and shrubs as well? But these spring ephemeral plants in the forest floor, on the forest floor or on our landscape floor are really, really beneficial to these early pollinators. We have our hoverflies, which is our flower flies or hoverflies or flower flies, and the bee flies. Now, what did you tell me about those before we started talking, Lexi? Oh, they
So
eat aphids.
they eat aphids. So, this is where pest control and nature just taking care of other pests, this is where it really comes into play. So we want to support all of these creatures that then in turn help keep the other unwanted pests out of our gardens.
Very cool. And that one, I don't think I've ever seen that bee fly down there, but I definitely every year see those upper hoverflies and flower flies. And I had no idea that they were helping keep the aphids down in my garden. Also, another key early emerging pollinator that would greatly appreciate the presence of some of these spring ephemerals are our mining bees. And of course, our female bumblebee queens and some of the workers. The queen is at the bottom. Look at how much bigger she is. If you're wondering if you have a queen bee, if you're seeing a queen bee in your yard or not, chances are, if you're questioning, it wouldn't be a queen, because the queens are significantly bigger than the other bees. They really look huge when you see them in the spring. So keep an eye out for those bumblebee queens. They're pretty magnificent. And the best times to see them are the spring and the fall. And then of course our small little carpenter bees. They love these spring ephemerals as well. All these early emerging pollinators that have been hibernating in our leaf litter or elsewhere over the winter. When
Oh,
we
just real
when we thought that our yards were dead and barren, nope, these guys were just hanging out waiting.
exactly. And just one quick note about that bee fly, it actually hovers like a hummingbird. And if you see one, you'll think, what is that? But it is just such a unique insect, and it has this hovering effect like a hummingbird and flaps its wings like very, very frequently. But it's not a bee, it is a bee fly.
That is, I really don't think I've ever seen one of those. Now I got to be on the lookout for that.
It's super cool.
Okay. So not only are these spring ephemerals helping out our early season pollinators, which in turn are going to help out us by pollinating our plants and helping our environment and getting rid of our, keeping our aphids under control and so on and so on. But they're actually helping the other plants that are around them that may not be coming up yet. In our landscapes, native spring ephemerals absorb large amounts of water from spring rains when few other plants are active, like now, all the rains that we're having. They hold on to the water and the nutrients, and they release it slowly back into the ground as they die back, just like you're used to with your daffodils. They slowly die back, and when they're completely brown, then you cut off the the brown foliage if you would like. These spring ephemerals are doing the same thing, and very interesting that they're actually holding water and holding nutrients, releasing it back into the ground, so then that next generation or what have you, the next succession of plants are coming up with a lot of moisture and a lot of nutrients, and that would have been just wasted or gone down into the storm sewers had they not been holding it in. So again, I just marvel sometimes when I hear the different ways that things in nature co-evolve with each other and partner with each other and assist each other. It really is beautiful. Um, as I said, that moisture and nutrition will then provide for later spring plants that start emerging, and this amazing cooperation saves water and nutrients for the plant community that would otherwise run off. And in this photo, we are seeing a combo of Virginia bluebells, toothwort, which is one I'm not familiar with, but looks cute, and I could see why it's called a toothwort, and, and of course, mayapple.
I love that layered landscape look with that photo.
I know.
You could do that with some old branches or like a stumpery, put some old tree stumps there and plant your spring ephemerals there. But what a beautiful layered effect. And then once those die back, you can have other plants, waiting to come up. So just a really spectacular effect there with the leftover logs, and which are also great for overwintering insects too.
And you know what? Like we were talking before we came on, Lexi, think of how beautiful if you love your tulips or you love your daffodils, go ahead and plant some of these around them. Imagine how pretty these bluebells and these other plants would look next to your daffodils. Just plant them all together, and then you have this colorful mass of different flowers.
Yeah, and like you said, we don't have to worry about the daffodils out competing. You know, these are actually pretty good competitors, especially the bluebells and the trout lilies and the May apples. So definitely include the plants, you know, that might sing to your heart and make you feel like spring is here. This is such a special one, yellow trout lily. And if you've ever been in a forest preserve and just see like a mass of these, it is just such a spectacular effect. There's a yellow trout lily and there's also a white trout lily, and we're going to be going over the white trout lily this evening. But we wanted to explain just the root structure of some of these plants. So some native spring ephemerals grow from bulbs, so just like your daffodils or your tulips, tubers or corms, which are slightly different, but a bulb-like effect as well. And then others grow through rhizomes. And if you want to just kind of have a point of reference for a bulb versus a corm, a bulb is going to be more onion-like and it looks like it has scales or kind of layers. A corm looks a little bit more like a potato. And then we also have rhizomes, which rhizomes will spread and form shoots out. So those are definitely good spreading plants. But so early fall and early spring are the best times to plant our spring ephemerals. And they do like the cool soil, so that is going to be the best time to get them into the ground.
And I've never planted yellow trout lily, but I was doing a little research on it and because it's so pretty, and I found that it is a staple food for the eastern chipmunk.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And it's also a host to a specialist bee, I believe, as well. But a specialist bee needs the yellow trout lily. And I think do we have that one on our list? Oh, no, we have white trout lily. So, yeah, again, just the interconnectedness of these plants and the creatures that they support is just so fascinating.
Whoops. Little too heavy of a finger there.
Okay, so here's our list of the 7 spring ephemerals we're going to go over this evening. So the first one is Spring Beauty. That's also my background back here. And again, very short-lived spring ephemeral, but critically important to one of the bees that we're going to be looking at this evening. It's the only plant that it can actually feed off of. Wild hyacinth, just a gorgeous plant. And if you see a mass of these together, it just looks absolutely spectacular. So you can get your hyacinth in there using a native version. Then we've got Dutchman's breeches, which looks like a pair of breeches hanging upside down. So that's where it's got its name. It looks very similar to a plant called squirrel corn. The flowers kind of look the same, but this is Dutchman's breeches. Then we also have Midland shooting star, and there's a couple of different plants within this family. One's really specific to the East Coast. There's actually another one on the West Coast, but we're going to be going over Midland shooting star. Really interesting flower structure there. Virginia bluebells, one of Kathy's favorite plants, and you can see why. It's just so dainty and delicate, and what a sight to see in the early spring. Then we've got white trout lily, and again, like the yellow trout lily, this is amazing when you see it en masse in a field. It's just spectacular under some trees. And then we have large flowered trillium. This is the white version of the trillium. This is Trillium grandiflorum, and just a spectacular spring ephemeral.
Okay, before we start going over our individual species, I do just want to ask you, please like this video. It really does, it helps out our channel very much. And subscribe if you would like to always know when we are going to have new content coming on. But also, if you wouldn't mind, put in, if you're somebody that likes to walk through the woods or you go walking or hiking through the woods, let us know if you ever see any of these growing in nature out in the woods, out in the forest floor. Pay attention at this time of year when you're walking and what you're seeing coming up through those leaves. We kind of don't pay too much attention to that, but this is the time to see what is naturally coming up. And I know I'm going to be looking for these as I go walking over the next month and see what I can see. So the first one we're going to talk about is Spring Beauty. Like Lexi said, it's her backdrop. Claytonia virginica. And it has white to pinkish flowers. Almost it appears like a little bit of a striped effect on the flowers. This will bloom in April and May, and it prefers medium to wet soil, just like the forest floor in the spring. It does prefer shade, but it appreciates that filtered light that it gets before the canopy of the forest is or of your landscape is covered densely. This is a critical food source for many species of early native pollinators. Can't stress this enough. This is a great plant for those early pollinators, and an absolute must-have for the specialist spring beauty mining bee. I don't know how much we've talked, but I know we've mentioned this in previous presentations, but we always think of like the monarch butterfly and some other butterflies, many other butterflies that can only feed off of their larvae, or their caterpillars can only feed off of one species of native plant. And if that plant disappears from landscapes, then that species disappears. And that's largely what has happened with our monarch butterfly as milkweed disappears, and it's happening throughout the butterfly and moth population. But close to 50% of our bees are also specialist feeders. About 50% are generalists. They can feed off of many plants, but close to 50% are specialists. And what that means is the adult, just like the adult butterfly, can feed off of many different species of plants. But just like those caterpillars of the butterflies and moths, the young, the larva, can only feed off of the pollen of a certain species, one certain species of native plants. And this is the case for our spring beauty mining bee, just as is in the name. It comes out in the early spring, looking for that spring beauty, and that spring beauty again is the only plant that it can feed the pollen from to its larva. So really important plant for many pollinators, but especially if you're a spring beauty mining bee. This grows from a corm, and it is hardy in zones 3 to 9. And here you can see the native range. It's definitely native to as Lexi had said, the central and the eastern US, naturally found in a lot of the deciduous forests. And here's a picture of that spring beauty mining bee that depends on spring beauty. Ah, how
Isn't this
gorgeous.
gorgeous?
Ah, I
Just
looked at
really
this picture and my blood pressure just dropped 30 points.
totally. So we've got wild hyacinth and it looks like some geranium in there. Like what a spectacular combination. So this actually blooms a little bit later than something like Spring Beauty. So this is going to bloom in May, and it's a great bloom gap plant because you've got your early spring ephemerals, and you've got things blooming in the spring, and then you've got your summer bloomers. So this one is going to bridge that gap, and what a spectacular sight to see it en masse like that. So this grows in full sun to part shade. It likes medium soil, and it is a great source of pollen and nectar for many of our native pollinators. This one grows from a true bulb, and it is hardy in zones 4 to 8. So this supports a wide range of generalist native bees and our hoverflies, flower flies. So also our bumblebees really enjoy this as a source of nectar and pollen. Our mason bees, look how cute he is. And the tiny little sweat bees, this is a metallic green sweat bee. And again, you can see here on our native range that all of these plants, really the Rockies, that's the cutoff for these spring ephemerals and early spring bloomers. And that's our native range right there. So again, really important plant for pollen and nectar, and absolutely stunning.
A lot of yellow on that map, right?
Right, so that means it's rare or endangered in those areas. So again, if these plants don't exist for these pollinators, then we've got a problem because they need to find those nectar and pollen resources really early in the season to get their colonies going for the rest of the summer. So again, the timing of everything is so important, and we have to make sure that these plants are still in our landscapes.
And that's why I'm saying, as if you are somebody that has a forest preserve area near you or natural areas near you with trees, pay attention to see if you see any of these. It would be interesting to know, we all know, and I don't want to get depressing here, but we all know how so many of our natural lands are overrun with invasive species. So I just wonder what effect those invasive species have had on these spring ephemerals. Do these spring ephemerals come up before the invasive species, so therefore they have fared better than some of our other native species? Or are they disappearing from our woodlands as well? So if we go out and walk through the woodland and we're not really seeing any of these in the spring, then we know we should really try to get some of these in our home landscapes so that we're keeping them around. Dutchman's breeches. I mean, the flowers are great, but isn't that pretty foliage on these?
It's absolutely stunning. It's almost fern-like and just so delicate and beautiful.
What does it reminds me of something. Well, maybe I'm thinking of the bleeding heart, because for those of you who have been gardeners for, any length of time, you're probably familiar with bleeding hearts. Bleeding hearts have been a very common, popular garden plant for many years, and the bleeding hearts that we know, the common one, that is not native. Uh, but it is a stunning plant, but that one it's not a native plant. The Latin name for this is Dicentra cucularia, and you might recognize that Latin Dicentra if you're looking at the non-native bleeding heart. So it's in the same family. So this is our native Dicentra, and it blooms in April and May. It prefers the shade of the forest or the wooded area in a suburban or urban landscape. It does need adequate moisture, but it must be well drained. It does not want to sit in water. Hardy in zones 3 to 7, this grows from a bulb-like tuber. And the common name refers to the shape of the hanging flowers and their resemblance to a pair of white breeches. So would everybody concur that that looks like white breeches?
Hanging on a clothesline. Do you think the leaves kind of look like parsley? Like a flat
Yes,
Italian parsley or something?
you're absolutely right. Or carrots,
Oh
right?
yeah, carrots, yeah.
But not the same family, but it reminds me of that. This foliage is so pretty, it's almost like sad that it kind of disappears because it's an ephemeral, because that would be beautiful foliage to stay out there all year.
Absolutely.
Here is our Bonap map for Dutchman's breeches, and as you can see, this is native to the most of the central and eastern U.S., but mostly found in the north central and northeastern U.S. And there's a close-up of those cool breeches flowers. And it is an important food source for bumblebees, and specifically our queen bumblebees that come out of hibernation in search of nectar and pollen to fuel up so that they can get their their colony started. And we won't talk a lot about this today, but Lexi was doing some research on this, and for any of you who have ever seen or read a book by Heather Holmes and know about buzz pollination, those queen bumblebees use buzz pollination to release the pollen. Do you want to talk at all about that buzz pollination, Lexi?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, if you've ever seen a bumblebee on a plant and you see them kind of like shaking their back, like they're using their body to get the pollen and resources out of that flower. So the other thing is that because of their size, they are actually stronger than a bumblebee worker bee. They're stronger than, you know, a honeybee. A honeybee couldn't do this. So in that way, you know, them co-evolving with these flowers is just absolutely fascinating because their physical features are made to work with this flower. And this plant actually couldn't exist without that bumblebee doing its buzz pollination. So again, just the magic of nature and the codependency of these plants and these insects on each other is just absolutely fascinating. But you know, look a little closely when you've got these plants, or you find them in the forest reserve, or you're looking around, and hopefully you get to see a bee on one of them. See what they're doing and how they're interacting with that plant, and maybe try to get a video or something too.
The buzz of a bumblebee means more than just the sound. It's technique, right? Or
Yeah,
can be.
absolutely. Okay, so Midland shooting star. This is another one that depends on the buzz pollination technique for the plant to be pollinated and also for the bumblebee to get its resources. So this is Midland shooting star. It is a true spring ephemeral of the prairie. And this one will definitely die back, the foliage and everything, you know, by the early summer. So this grows in full to part sun and it prefers medium soil. It will bloom in April and May, and the flower provides only pollen, no nectar. So it attracts bees seeking protein for their young. And as the bumblebee gets this pollen and collects it and puts it onto its back legs and it attaches to the hairs of its body, it's going to take that back to its nest and it's going to lay an egg with the pollen. And when that egg becomes a larva, it starts to eat at that pollen. So that becomes its resources for the next insect to grow, which is just fascinating. So again, without these plants, you know, these bumblebees couldn't get their colony started. And this one grows from a bulb-like tuber. So it is kind of in between a corm and a a rhizome and a I'm sorry, what was the other one? The bulb. So definitely kind of a hybrid situation of what this root structure is like.
I just want to re-emphasize to everybody to look at that. So this is where we're most of these spring ephemerals that we're talking about are ephemeral plants of the woodland. And this is the true spring ephemeral of the prairie. And notice that it likes full to part sun. So most of the other, if not all of the other spring ephemerals that you're going to see in this presentation, and most of them in general, they're really going to thrive if your landscape is somewhat shaded and if you have a lot of tree cover, and those falling leaves that you leave are very important for a lot of these spring ephemerals. But this one is meant to come up in the prairie where there's not tree cover, where there's full sun. So if you have a landscape that has no trees or very few and a lot of bright sun, and you want to try out some of these spring ephemerals to really help our early queen bumblebees, this would be a great one to try, the Midland shooting star.
Absolutely. And look at this range. So again, eastern and central US cut off at the Rockies. But the flowers' petals are just really interesting. They're in this dangled position and they're perfectly shaped for that buzz pollination. And honeybees cannot perform this buzz pollination and only certain native bees can. So again, these plants and these insects, they go right together. It's like a game of memory and matching, you know, which plant goes with which creature. But absolutely essential for our queen bumblebees.
I'm glad I got this one, Virginia bluebells. Um, as I think Keith was saying in a recent presentation, he's never met anybody who doesn't love Virginia bluebells. They truly are stunning. And you almost can't even get photos that do them justice, because I'm telling you, on a cloudy day or in the evening when they're blooming, they glow. There's just a glow to them. And they are truly stunning when they are blooming. And the other cool thing is they bloom a long time. So this is considered by many, Mertensia virginica is the Latin name. This is considered to be one of the most beautiful native spring ephemerals. And it has flowers that start out pink and gradually turn a lovely shade of medium blue. It grows in part shade to shade, and it prefers medium to moist soil, blooms April, May, and is hardy in zones 3 to 8. Because of those long tubular flowers, only the largest bumblebees, probably those queens, have the strength to push their way up the long tubular flowers. And so that gives them the edge. So even if there's a lot of other bees or hoverflies and so on, or hoverflies or hover bees or whatever the hell in the area, those queen bumblebees, if they have, you know, full pick of these for as far as bees go, of these Virginia bluebells. They know that they're going to get their resources met with these, except they do have to compete with butterflies, because spring butterflies and moths are the real champions of bluebell pollination. You got the spring butterflies and moths and the queen bee. So we talk a lot about bees with these spring ephemerals, but those butterflies and moths are out there then, those early emerging butterflies and moths, and they love Virginia bluebells. It grows from rhizomes, and I can't stress enough, it has a very long bloom season, longer than most of these spring ephemerals. So I think they're blooming at least a month, if I remember correctly. I'm just starting to see mine come up. They're not blooming yet, but I'm excited about them. Native to the eastern and central US. And again, it is, we can see the swallowtail here and the bumblebees. So the bumblebee queens love that early and need the rich source of nectar and pollen to fuel their colony, starting up their colony. And their long tongues of these critters, the large bees and the butterflies, can easily reach into the bell-shaped flowers to get the feast that's down there at the bottom.
That eastern tiger swallowtail was one of the first butterflies I've seen the past 2 seasons. How about you?
You know, by me, I see red admirals early. I have a lot of red admirals by me for some reason, and I see those early. But you have a lot, so I wonder if there's a certain species that you have that they're really attracted to early. But I'm going to keep an eye out now that I know that these Virginia bluebells are such an important nectar source for the swallowtails. I'm going to keep an eye out for that to see if I get any, because when you plant a few, they will spread and colonize in other places. And I think a lot of these ephemerals, even though they grow from a corm or a tuber, some of them do actually spread by seed, and they will, spread themselves to elsewhere in your landscape. And you're thrilled when they do, because then you start getting a new colony forming somewhere else, and it's just lovely. And so after having these in a few years now, I have like a few colonies throughout the landscape. So I'm going to be seeing if I start attracting some of these swallowtails early.
That would be
Because we
so
don't normally,
magnificent.
yeah, because we don't normally think of too many butterflies like in April, but I'll see.
Yeah, and at least the red admiral population seem pretty healthy, so that's great.
Yeah.
So white trout lily. So here is an example of something you might see in your forest preserve. The logs are just kind of the old woods just kind of on the ground, and these beautiful white trout lilies are popping up in between them, and they'll die back. But this is why the forest floor needs to be kept cleared of things like buckthorn and these other invasive species, so we can have our ephemerals be able to, do their thing in the springtime and get the sunlight that they need and not be crowded out by all of those invasive species. So this white trout lily, this is going to bloom very early. So April and May, it's just about time for these. Definitely likes the shade and the moist woodland setting, so medium to wet soil. This is hardy in zones 2 to 8, and this grows from a true bulb, just like the yellow trout lily as well. It's going to be a true bulb. It attracts many native spring bees, including queen bumblebees, And it's also the specialist bee for the white trout lily is called the trout lily mining bee. It's also known as the Easter bee. So just in time, it's almost Easter time. And that's called Adrena erythrone. So again, these plants are critical for certain species of bees and important for biodiversity.
I just want to add, I was doing a little bit of reading about this because I've not grown it, and this is actually a species of special concern because there's so little of it left in most of the country. So this would be a good one for us to try to get going.
Yeah, and imagine planting a little ephemeral corner in your garden under some trees, I mean, you could do just a little thing like this with the logs and a couple different species and how beautiful and magical that would be in early spring to witness.
Totally.
Okay, so again, native range, we're right in smack in the middle of the country. And here you can see some more detail about these leaves and why they're called trout lily. It kind of looks like a trout. It's got these mottled colors of different variegated greens to it. The flowers kind of point down, and here you can see a close-up detail of this trout lily mining bee. So the mining bees come to visit the flowers for the pollen and the nectar, and again, they are a specialist bee and require this plant. So again, a very important one to get planted.
Now we have the large flowered Trillium, Trillium grandiflorum. I'm sure it looks very grand in the forest. It's a must-have for a woodland garden. Grows in part to full shade, medium to moist soil, and it blooms in April to June. So this is a long bloom season. The common name that you might be familiar with is wake robin, as it blooms when its bloom coincides with the return of robins, and it is hardy in zones 3 to 8. It grows through rhizomes, and it is pollinated by spring bees, especially spring bumblebees and queen bumblebees. And after the pollination, I think this is really cool, the white trillium's white flowers turn pink, and that's its way to signal to passing bees that there's a better meal nearby. Don't waste your effort here. Move on to the next white flower. And I also, in some research, I found that these, if you plant them by seed, these guys can take 5 to 7 years to bloom. Now, patience is not one of my best virtues. So I would say that we would be much better off, if we're going to go with this, to do it from a bare root so that we get blooms sooner. And its flowers, I thought this was interesting because it's kind of hard to tell when you see it in a photo, but these flowers, they're pretty big. These flowers reach across, like a lot of the spring ephemerals have very little flowers, but they can be 4 inches in diameter. So this would be pretty spectacular on our garden floor or on the forest floor. And just like with a lot of these woodland spring ephemerals, the fallen leaves are vital. They create the perfect environment. They create the mulch or the perfect growing conditions and moisture and so on that these spring ephemerals thrive in. So wherever you're planting them, be sure, I mean, we want to leave a lot of our leaves in our landscape anyway, but be sure that wherever you're planting them is a place where you definitely are going to leave the leaves because they really need that leaf cover. And here we have the native range of the large flowered Trillium, and it is native to the eastern and upper Midwest. Again, loved by our bumblebees, an important source important food source for our early spring queen bumblebees. And trilliums are responsible for supporting the success of early bumblebee colonies, which then go on to pollinate other native plants later in the season. So you want a nice thriving colony to start out early in the spring if you want those bumblebees to be doing all of their pollination, and other bees doing all their pollination throughout the season, both on our other native plants and on your fruits and vegetables if you're growing those as well.
And that brings us to the end of our presentation. That was quick, Kathy.
This was a quick one.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make you guys sit through 2 hours. We thought they need a break. They need something quick. It's quick and
Right.
sweet.
So we hope you learned something about spring ephemerals this evening and how they are a powerful way to support our native early emerging pollinators, and that they're not just beautiful, delicate flowers, but they form the foundation of the spring food web. They're fueling our bumblebee queens, our mining bees, and other beneficial insects when resources are scarce. So be sure to plant some in your shade garden, create a stumpery, and just enjoy those spring ephemerals as the first sign of spring. We thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.